what was actually released, and the dotted line is that February through June, 40% unimpaired flow. So had the Bay Delta plan been in effect, the river would have seen more water. Now, did our conservation help the river? No, because what they did is they basically released what they were required to release, and then the rest of it they captured behind dams, because you never know how long the drought's going to last. So they have a very conservative drought policy, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And so, everyone's thinking, it's like, yeah, I'm going to, capture the water in my sink. I'm going to use gray water. I'm not going to flush my toilet. I'm going to only water once a week, and because I care about the environment, but it didn't show up in the environment. So 2013, again, you see what it would have been with 40%. 2014, 2015, 2016, this was a normal water year. And in December of 2016, total system storage was up to about 83%. Enough water to last 4.5 years. So we were down to 3 years in 2015. We had a normal water year. We came out of it with enough water to last 4.5 years. So to fill up everything, and that's the SFPUC's goal, is to, on July 1st, to have the system full. And that way they know they can survive a 6-year drought. So going into water year 2017, water years from October to October, they needed 373,000 acre feet to fill up everything. And here we are in December, they're at 83% capacity. And then January, it's like just, they had the right in 2017 to capture enough water to last 12 years. So remember, 250,000 acre feet was what the demand was in 2013, so that's the pre-drought baseline. And they had the right to capture over 3 million acre feet. So this is what the hydrograph looked like. This is the same scale as what we saw before, 2012 to 2016. And this is a different scale. So before that's 10,000 CFS at the top, and now we go to 70,000. So obviously in January, there's a pretty big storm there. And you can see that the 40% unimpaired flow is this black line. So they were forced to, the system filled up in early January, the beginning of the second wettest year on record in the Tuolumne watershed. And they had to dump all that water. They didn't have any place to capture it. And they had to dump it at the maximum amount they were allowed by flood control rules to make sure they weren't going to flood in desolate places downstream. And when I say they, it's all the water agencies, the irrigation districts and the SFPUC. Because the irrigation districts, they control the dam that actually releases the Tuolumne. And for a week, they had to release 15,000 CFS. So it was 9,000 that's the flood rule, and they had to release 15,000 because there was so much water. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of flood. So this was all water that wouldn't have been required to be released. And then anytime the red is above the dotted line, then it means that what was actually flowing down the river is that much higher than 40%. So basically, we human beings dumped enough water to fill all the reservoirs on the Tuolumne River twice. And wouldn't it have been nice if we had portioned that out through the drought, so that every year the river was getting a little bit more water, and we still would have had 2 years worth of water in storage at the height of the drought. So things got off to a rocky start. I mentioned in September of 2016, the environmental document came out, and the SFPUC and BOSCA, which is the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. BOSCA represents 26 wholesale customers outside of San Francisco. So some cities and water agencies in San Mateo, Santa Clara, Alameda County. They came out with this editorial in the Chronicle that said, oh my God, this plan is going to the sky is falling. We could lose up to 188,000 jobs and $49 billion. Like, what? So we looked at their socioeconomic study. We actually looked at it long before this report came out. And we gave them a lot of feedback on it. It was a draft plan. We gave them feedback. SFPUC kept promising we were going to have meetings to discuss it, never did, and then they released these figures into the public. So problems we found, really obvious things, they based rationing on demand versus supply. So for example, say you make $250 a day and you spend $175 a day. You put $75 in the bank, that's great. But then economy goes bad and your salary goes down, your wage goes down $175 a day. Well, you're still making ends meet, you're just not saving anything. Well, they went off of the 175. It's like, oh, now we're down to 100. So, obvious mistake. They treated the water in the Bay Area, which is about 15% of the supply, as if it would be impacted by something happening on the Tuolumne. Obviously, that wouldn't be. They didn't really look at this whole idea of storage and carryover water and the replenishment. You know, in a normal year, you can, 2 normal years, you can fill up everything again. And then they totally underestimated the potential for water conservation. So we were right on all those counts. We gave a workshop to the State Water Board, and we presented our analysis, and they're like, oh, this is really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this. A few weeks later, San Francisco had their workshop, and they didn't say anything about the economic impacts. And one of the board members said, now in 2013, you gave us these figures that were, they've become very controversial now, but you haven't mentioned them. Do you want to comment? And they kind of shuffled around and said, well, we're updating our study and we'll submit it with our comments. So in front of a sophisticated audience, they didn't use those figures. So, wonderful thing, between 2006 and 2016, in a 10-year period, water demand in the SFPUC's territory decreased by 30%. Really quite remarkable. And even with population growth, and a lot of growth between 78 and 2016, water demand was at the lowest. And that's not per capita, it's net. So we were using less water with 1 million more people. So it was really quite remarkable.
Why?
Yeah.
Is that because the industry's changed?
Part of it is that some water-intensive industries have gone away, but it's plumbing codes. You can't buy a 7-gallon per flush toilet anymore. People have low-flow shower heads. People are thinking more about converting lawns, using gray water, all those different things. So, according to their study, 30% rationing, which is what we did in a 10-year period, should have resulted in the loss of 25,000 jobs and $6.5 billion. But what actually happened? In San Francisco alone, between 2010 and 2015, during the drought, 125,000 jobs were added. And then there are jobs in the other counties too. So in San Francisco and Gary.
So, what's the mechanism in these economic studies that connects water conservation to employment?
So, if we are forced to conserve more water than is convenient, then it's going to have to come out of industry. And they're going to have to lay off workers and produce less goods. And so so we need water to produce goods, and it takes labor to create those goods. That's the thinking behind it. And basically what they did is they said, okay, 30% rationing is like, 30% from residential, 30% from industry. I mean, it's like really kind of, and it gets a little bit complicated, but we've gotten into the weeds with them, and we keep finding more and more errors in their analysis. But the bottom line is they had these projections, and the real world experience showed that they were way off. And in San Francisco and San Mateo County, which get almost all their water from the SFPUC, and they make up 2/3 of all the consumers, the number of jobs increased by 27%, and the water use declined by 23%. So I don't know if that means that water conservation is good for the economy. They probably would draw that conclusion if it was the other way, right? But it's like, this is what happened. So what we did is we said, well, what would happen if the drought of record, 6 years between 1987 and 1992, repeated? And the demand rebounded to 223 million gallons per day, which was what it was in 2013. And we had 40% of the impaired flow. And so we knew what the hydrology was, and we we assumed that San Francisco would be responsible for 51.7%. Everything as conservative as we could, using all our own numbers. And what we found was very modest rationing. No rationing in the first 2 years because you don't know you're in a drought. And then 10%, and it's like, okay, this is getting kind of serious, going to 20%. So an average of 10%. And again, we did 30% recently. They'd end up with not a lot of water, but they'd end up with water. And then 93, it started raining again, and everything filled up. So that's what would happen. So the SFPUC, they don't do this kind of analysis. They put out figures. They put out figures like the Bay Delta plant could result in 50% rationing at the first sign of drought. And everyone's like, oh my God. And then we say, well, no, wait a minute. That's not true. And then it becomes a he said, she said. And reporters are kind of like, well, SFPUC said this, the environmental groups say this. Elected officials, it's like, who do they trust? I mean, it's really been an effort to get the truth out there. But the SFPUC has acknowledged that our model is accurate. So they don't challenge us at all. But what they say is, well, we look at it differently. We're planning for our design drought. They've created a potential drought that combines the two worst droughts of the latter half of the last century. So it's the 6-year drought of record, followed by the driest 2-year period on record, 76, 77. When I was a kid, that was my drought. I haven't flushed the toilet since. It ingrains into you, right? And then they look at, well, what is the projected demand in 2040? And it's not what their internal projections are, which is about 250 million gallons per day. It's what Plan A area is projecting. And so they don't tell anyone, it's like, this is what our 50% rationing figure is based on, a very conservative, arbitrary drought. They just put out these alarming figures, and then you have those job losses and economic losses. So most water agencies, they plan for a 3-year drought. East Bay Mud has a sensitivity analysis to go to 6 years, and SFPUC is much more conservative at 8.5 years. So what would happen if they followed their rationing plan? Well, at the end of the 6-year drought, and then again 93 it started raining again, they would end up with 576,000 acre-feet in storage. And remember, 250,000 acre-feet is the baseline 2013. So all these economic impacts they're projecting would have been for naught. Now, they don't know that. I mean, they say, well, it's like, yeah, we got lucky in 93 that it rained. What if there were 2 more dry years? We have to be prepared for anything. Well, the thing is, we got this incredible backup water supply, which is agriculture. 80% of the developed water is used for agriculture. You can fallow a lot of crops. Now, they're planting a lot of almonds and trees and vineyards and stuff that they're going to need water every year. But there's still a lot of low-value crops where we could basically say, hey, we will pay the farmers, the laborers, the processors, the distributors, exactly what they would make, and they don't have to do any work. But we'll buy their water, and it would be cheaper than what we pay SFPUC for water right now. So, they'll say, well, the irrigation districts don't want to sell us water. Well, they're going to be struggling during a drought too. And there will be a lot of farmers, laborers, processors, distributors that say, it's like, what? I get paid the same amount of money, but I don't have to do any work, and I don't have to worry about running out of water. Yeah, you have to count me in. And even if they didn't, the state's going to say, look, the beneficial use here is keeping Silicon Valley and San Francisco ticking. That's our economy. Agriculture, 2% of the state economy. You look at high tech and stuff, that's where the big bucks are. So we're not going to run out of water. We're going to buy it from agricultural districts. And that's a worst case scenario. That's if we have a drought worse than anything we've ever had. Yeah.
Have you seen the breakdown for agriculture that uses state or federal water project water versus agriculture that doesn't use statement, what is, the 2% I assume covers everything.
Yeah.
So what's the breakdown for the non-project water ag versus project?
I don't know, you know, farmers who buy water from the state project or the federal project, they pay more. You know, we pay $2,200 per acre foot for water from the Tuolumne. That's treated, okay? Farmers pay $20 per acre foot for raw water. Yeah. And there's a lawsuit in Modesto from the electric ratepayers who are saying, you are charging us extra to subsidize farmers, and Prop 2018 does not allow that. And you're only charging them 20% of the cost of delivery, and that means we're picking up the rest. And that case is pending.
Well, they do that in Santa Clara County too.
They do, yeah.
We're subsidizing ag,
Right.
and they're getting a much better deal than the rest of us are.
But they're paying a lot more than in Stanislaus County. But you know, the idea is that they want to incentivize keeping agricultural land and not converting it to the Gilroy strip malls.
The excuse in Santa Clara County is that it's keeping that land in open space, but I wonder, why couldn't we bring back a more vigorous Williamson Act and have more open space credit and stop subsidizing ag through water, instead give them more of a Williamson Act base?
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. And my feeling is that, you know, if you want to get this cheap water, you've got to basically put an easement on your land that is not going to be, you know, converted to some other use for at least a certain amount of time, and so that you're not just, you know, holding this land, you know, getting cheap water, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I'm selling it to an outlet. So you're right, and these two gentlemen here are on one of the committees. So I think I saw them taking notes, and they're going to take it back. Yeah, that's a very good point. Now I've just got a couple more slides here. So basically, we've been putting a lot of pressure on San Francisco to represent the values of its constituents. And their point is like, hey, we have this much better plan. You know, instead of wasting all this water, we can meet the environmental goals by doing these things. We're going to add gravel, we're going to clean it, we're going to come in there with a machine and clean out the sediments in between the gravel that normally a high flow would do. So all these things that nature did, but can't do anymore because of low flows, we're going to come in and manually do it. We're going to put in large boulders. You know, normally you'd have logs and things floating down and creating great habitat complexity. But they're going to do boulders. They're going to plant riparian trees. You need floodplain to activate cottonwoods and other species, so they're not, you know, they're dying back. We're going to go in there and plant. We're going to pay money to spray water hyacinth to get rid of that, whereas normally, you know, you flush it out. During the drought, we had all this water hyacinth. When it started raining again, it went down to Stockton. We're going to put a fish barrier weir, a dam in there that's going to allow salmon to get past it, but it's going to somehow keep bass out. Maybe have fishing derbies to capture those bass. And you know, they're going to keep coming back because the ecosystem favors them, but you know, we think this will work. But those are all non-flow measures, and then when it comes to flow, it's like very few changes. And so we say, it's like, hey, you know, State Water Board, if these things work, they will reward you. They'll drop the flow down to 30%. So if you're convinced these will work, why don't you accept that? It's kind of a challenge to you. They want a checklist. They want to say, hey, you know, we did all these things. Hey, it didn't work, sorry, but we got our license and we're going to move forward. But we always bust them on all this stuff. Their own policy, they have an environmental stewardship policy, and this is for the upper Tuolumne where they have their dams. And releases will basically be based on unimpaired flow. So they have a policy based on unimpaired flow, but for some reason, in the lower Tuolumne, functional flows are a better alternative. And you know, scientists would say functional flows and unimpaired flow are one and the same. You're mimicking the ecosystem, but somehow they have these magic flows that produce more fish with less water. So these are the 5 State Water Board directors appointed by the governor. Felicia Marcus in the middle is the chair. Smart people, that, you know, they want to do the right thing, want to base it on best available science. Tremendous pressure coming out of the Central Valley to not do anything. San Francisco's on board with that. I think we've tempered them down a little bit. They're not quite as obvious about things. But behind the scenes, they're spreading a lot of misinformation. So the hearing is going to be on August 21st, 22nd, in a couple of weeks. It's going to be in Sacramento, and we're going to try to get a lot of people to come up for that. And we're going to be organizing carpools. We're working with the Loma Prieta chapter and the Bay chapter of Sierra Club and a lot of other groups, a lot working together. So what we want to do is we want to empower the State Water Board to do the right thing. There's going to be a rally with tractors and farmers that Adam Bray from the Central Valley is organizing on Monday the 20th. There's going to be a lot of pressure from the Central Valley. They're lobbying federal agencies under the Trump administration. You might have heard the Department of Interior Secretary Zinke was out there. They sent a letter to the water board saying what you're doing is illegal. So there's going to be a whole battle between state rights and federal rights. And so the Grand Old Party of state rights is like, no, your state rights don't count. So that's 21st and 22nd. I'm going to send this around. If anyone wants to be on my email list, encourage you to fill that out, and we'll keep you posted on things. A couple other things that are happening. The San Francisco PUC, in 2 years, has had one public hearing on the Bay Delta Plan, and that was in January of 2017, and Marty was there, bless his soul. And we actually turned out 44 people and had 37 people speak, and they're like, whoa, And we've been trying to get them to have a public meeting, because we come during public comment, we present our analysis, and the board's kind of like, well,